Hello and welcome to Jesuitical, a podcast from American Media for saints and sinners. You can join us each week for honest conversations about the Catholic Church and our world today, sometimes over drinks. I'm Ashley McKinless, and I'm joined by Zach Davis.
It's great to be with you, Ashley, but it would be even better if those drinks you were talking about, we had one of the new De Pope beers.
Yes.
Did you see this?
I did. The governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, met Pope Leo today at the Vatican and brought him De Pope beer, which is made by Burning Bush Brewery in Chicago. Have you ever been?
I've not. I've been to a handful of breweries in Chicago, but this is not one of them. But this, I feel like we have to get.
We have to.
Yeah. So Governor Pritzker, direct to camera. If you're watching this, could you please send us some De Pope beer? That'd be great. Or Pope Leo, if you're watching. If you didn't like your sample of it, you could just send it back over to the States.
He did say, put those in the fridge. So I think he's going to drink them.
I think he's going to drink them too. So we got a great show this week, though.
That's right. So while we are having turkey on Thanksgiving, Pope Leo is going to be traveling to Turkey. That's too lame.
I love that joke. I've been trying to think of other ways to extrapolate from it, but we'll stop there for now.
Okay, yeah. So this is Leo's first foreign trip as Pope, and so a lot of the focus is going to be on his time in Turkey. He is going to mark the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. You might have heard of that because of the Nicene Creed, which originated there. So he's going for ecumenical ceremony to mark that, but he's also going to Lebanon.
Yeah, that's right. And we've talked about Nicaea a lot on this show, and I want to point people again to Inside the Vatican's deep dive on the Council of Nicaea because it's just like a great history lesson and sort of it gives us an overview of where we're at in ecumenical dialogue today. But we wanted to focus this episode this week on the part of the trip that is Lebanon, like you said. Lebanon, I think, is this fascinating country for a number of reasons, but some of which are particularly interesting to the Pope and to Catholics around the world. We've got an ancient Christian culture there that exists. It's a sizable Christian population there that's been there for centuries. You've got an epicenter, of which there are many, of the refugee crisis. And it's this laboratory of interreligious flourishing. You've got a number of different religious groups that are trying to live in a democratic society together. And I think all those reasons make Lebanon for a fascinating topic of discussion and papal trip.
Yeah, and we have the perfect guest to discuss all of that. We're talking to Father Daniel Corrou. He is a Jesuit priest from the USA East Province, who is currently the regional director for Jesuit Refugee Service Middle East and North Africa. So he has been living and working in Beirut for many years and is deeply knowledgeable about this really complex history that you're talking about, but, is also doing the day-to-day work of helping the Syrian refugees who live there, as well as migrant workers from Asia and Africa who are coming to Lebanon and often face discrimination and hardship. So we talked to him about that, as well as this very complex political system that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, but tries to keep these different religions peaceful and functioning society.
Yeah, that's right. So stick around for that great conversation with Father Dan Corrou. But first,
we have Signs of the Times, the part of our show where we sift through the Catholic news of the week so you don't have to. What are we talking about this week, Zach?
So last week, we had the opportunity to attend the meeting of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which was in Baltimore. I was thrilled to be covering this. I wish it wasn't in November. I think maybe September would be a nicer month to be on the water in Baltimore. But a lot of exciting stuff happens at the bishops' meeting on a normal year. And this year in particular, there were a number of major issues hanging over the meeting.
Yeah, so going in, we had two major elections, the election of the president and the vice president. And this year was one of the years where it was kind of an open field. Oftentimes, the vice president is just kind of assumed to take the role of president, but this year he was too old to take that role.
Archbishop Lori was too old to have finished out a term serving as president.
So there were 10 nominees, and it was not obvious who was going to win. And then second, a lot of people were wondering what the bishops were going to say about the immigration situation in the country right now. Obviously, that's a huge story and of great importance to Catholics. We've seen Catholics in the streets processing to detention centers, and obviously Catholics are, a large part of the people targeted for deportation.
That's right, and that's something we've covered on this show, and Pope Leo has made comments about it. And we're going to unpack both that story and the election shortly, but those weren't the only headlines. This, took place over the course of a week. And there were a couple of other things on the agenda that we just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that came out of the bishops' meeting.
Yeah, so one of the big items was voting on what are called the ethical and religious directives. These are the guidelines that kind of say what is permissible to do in Catholic hospitals, and they hadn't been updated in a while, so they were voting on an amendment that would guide gender interventions, and basically they voted to ban interventions such as puberty blockers, gender transition surgeries, and that sort of thing. And it was a pretty overwhelming vote in favor of that.
Yeah, that's right. The bishops also voted to hold another Eucharistic Congress, National Eucharistic Congress. Last one was in Indianapolis. The next one is going to be in an unnamed city. As of right now, they did tease that the location reveal would be coming, but it's going to be in 2029. And in addition to that, they voted on a few other committee chairs. Friend of the podcast, Bishop William Walk of Pensacola, Tallahassee, was named the chair of the Committee on Evangelization, which is what we talked to him about on this podcast.
So fitting. Yeah, we got to talk to him after he won that election, and he was very excited, and I couldn't think of a better person for the role.
He's fired up. For the translation and scripture nerds, the New American Bible is going to be rebranded as the Catholic American Bible, so we're going from the NAB to the CAB. And the bishops also approved a new edition of the Liturgy of the Hours, among other things. So those are some of the highlights. But let's get into the meat of the two big stories that came out of the bishops' conference.
Right. So back to the presidential race. As I mentioned, there were 10 nominees, and going in, the front runners were seen as Archbishop Paul Coakley of Oklahoma City and Bishop Daniel Flores of Brownsville, Texas. And Coakley ended up winning on the third round, 128 to 109, so pretty close. Mm-hmm. And then Bishop Flores was voted vice president on the first round of voting.
It's interesting because a lot of this analysis was framed in pretty political terms and in terms of what the election was going to mean. But Archbishop Coakley, I think, has sort of like an interesting background in what he's done as a bishop and who he advises and the issues he advocates on that doesn't really break neatly, I think, along our normal partisan boundaries.
Yeah, so he's in Oklahoma, obviously a red state that has the death penalty, and he's been extremely outspoken against that. Actually, just last week, he commended the governor there for commuting the death sentence of an inmate. So, that's kind of liberal coded in the American political landscape.
The other side of that is he's also received criticism from people before and after this election for some of the support that he voiced back in the summer of 2018 for the now excommunicated Archbishop Vigano, who was former nuncio to the United States and accused Pope Francis of some pretty serious, I would say, cover-up allegations of covering up specifically former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick's sexual abuse. And I think he's not given like a great answer for the support that he gave for Vigano at the time. He said, we didn't know all this stuff about Vigano then. We just knew that he was a former nuncio and a respected churchman.
And was calling for, investigations into, cover up and there was cover-up, and so that's understandable.
For sure. I don't know that his answers have given enough of an answer to people who believe that support came at the expense of Pope Francis's own credibility.
Yeah, because Vigano also called for Pope Francis to resign.
Yes, that's right. So I think if I were Archbishop Coakley or advising him on relating to the media, I would maybe ask him about that. The second thing is that he's an ecclesial advisor to the Napa Institute, which is an organization that is pretty popular in political conservative circles and has hosted people like Archbishop Vigano for talks, as well as Bishop Joseph Strickland, who was a bishop from Tyler, Texas, who was fired by Pope Francis. And Bishop Flores, I would say, is from our analysis, is a pretty widely respected churchman. He was at the Synod on Synodality. So he's obviously up to date with what was Pope Francis's signature project for reforming the Catholic Church. And I think him winning on the second ballot or on the first ballot for vice president and, getting second in a close race on the third ballot for president shows that he is widely respected.
Yeah, and a lot of the talk around Flores also focused on his very outspoken criticism of the Trump administration's both border enforcement and mass deportation campaign. He is a border bishop. He's in Brownsville, Texas. So, a vote for him was seen as kind of elevating that criticism at a time when it's really critical.
That's right, and that's actually a great segue into the next story that I feel like broke containment from Catholic news. This was, published in mainstream secular press, but it's the bishop's statement that they made on immigration in the United States right now.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the top, there was a lot of anticipation about what the bishops would say, and part of that came from Pope Leo. Last month in October, the bishop who leads the migration committee, Bishop Mark Seitz, met with Pope Leo at the Vatican, bringing physical letters from undocumented migrants or undocumented people in the United States and talked to Pope Leo about their plight. And at that meeting, Pope Leo said to Bishop Seitz, I want the bishops to speak on this. I want them to be strong and I want them to be united. So, there was kind of that in the background as the bishops gathered in Baltimore and were crafting this message.
Yeah, so the message was what's called a special pastoral message. So these don't happen very often. The last one was in 2013. And they require a 2/3 majority, and they're issued on behalf of the entire body of bishops. So these are different than sort of statements that come out from the bishops' conference, which is its own entity, in the course of normal news events. So the last one I mentioned, 2013, that was in response to the Obama administration's contraceptive mandate that said health insurance plans had to pay for contraceptives. So that was 12 years ago, and this is the first time they've taken up this form of communicating since then.
Yeah, and it was actually kind of cool to be there to see how this kind of message is made. It's not easy to get over 200 people to agree on a statement.
Anything.
Anything.
Yeah.
So we were there when this statement, which had been written by a small committee, and then bishops were given a chance to give amendments, and those were incorporated kind of like behind closed doors. And then they brought it to kind of a public vote when we were in the room when that happened. And at that time, Archbishop Timothy Broglio, the previous president, said, okay, we've had a chance for amendments, so we're bringing it to the floor, but this is just a time to voice support for or against this message. But that's not what happened.
No, Cardinal Cupich stood up and sort of questioned if it was really true that this was not a time to propose new amendments. And, the parliamentary rules allow for it, but in the interest of time, you don't really want to be, wordsmithing something with a group of 300 people. But Cardinal Cupich's intervention was to insert the phrase, "We oppose the indiscriminate mass deportation of people," which does end up in the final document. It needed to get a second and then have a voice vote to be approved to be included in the statement. But it does make it a lot stronger. I think that was sort of a wise intervention from Cardinal Cupich because it added some teeth to the statement, which is very pastoral and expressed solidarity with the immigrant community. But this, I think, clarified what they're in solidarity against, right? Mm-hmm. Which is this mass deportation campaign that we've seen and we've talked about on this show before.
Yeah. And after Cupich made that intervention, a number of bishops did speak in favor of the message, including, we want to say, Archbishop Coakley, who, again, is coded this one way, but he spoke about his own experience serving migrants and was very supportive of this message and encouraged his brothers to vote for it.
I will be honest, when it was happening in real time, I wasn't sure if it was going to pass because I think it's hard to get anyone bishops to agree on anything, but I was totally wrong. It passed overwhelmingly, 216 votes in favor, 5 votes against, and 3 abstentions.
And met with a standing ovation when it passed.
Yeah. So I've had a couple people ask me who votes against or who votes in abstention for stuff like that, and a couple bishops had said that there are some bishops who are just voting no on everything in protest of using an electronic voting system. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I thought it was a fun little
Yeah.
piece of color from the meeting. I'm curious what your reaction was to that meeting, but specifically maybe like the bishop's statement on immigration.
I thought it was really strong. I think it showed real pastoral heart. The opening paragraph is it leads with kind of what the bishops are feeling as they see what's happening in this country and what our immigrant brothers and sisters are experiencing. But then it also has this strong language about opposing mass deportation. So I think it showed that this is something. This was not like just a pro forma thing. Like there's real passion behind it.
Yeah, and I thought the rollout was done particularly well. There is a really crafty, real vertical style video that the bishops put out that had like an impressive edit, and I feel like that helped it sort of break out. That people were paying attention to what was going on. Not everyone received the statement positively. To say the least.
No. So Tom Homan, who's Trump's border czar, who is also Catholic, criticized the statement and said that the bishops should be focused on fixing the Catholic Church. But Pope Leo liked it, so that's good.
Yes, that's right. On Tuesday, Pope Leo was leaving Castel Gandolfo, where he answered a question about the U.S. bishop's statement.
Well, I've made some statements about that already. I appreciate very much what the bishops have said. I think it's a very important statement. I would invite especially all Catholics, but people of goodwill, to listen carefully to what they said. I think we have to look for ways of treating people humanely, treating people with the dignity that they have. If people are in the United States illegally, there are ways to treat that. There are courts. There's a system of justice. I think there are a lot of problems in the system. No one has said that the United States should have open borders. I think every country has a right to determine who and how and when people enter. But when people are living good lives, and many of them for 10, 15, 20 years, to treat them in a way that is extremely disrespectful, to say the least, and there's been some violence, unfortunately, I think that the bishops have been very clear in what they said. And I think that I would just invite all people in the United States to listen to them.
I had seen this cut up on social media where some people clipped only the part where Pope Leo talks about nations having a right to secure their borders, which has led some people to conclude that was like the headline from his reaction, which instead I think is pretty clear. What he's saying is that he's inviting not just Catholics, but all people of goodwill to listen and read what the bishops wrote and try to listen to it and respond to it.
Now stick around for our conversation with Father Daniel Corrou about Lebanon, its complex religious history, and why Pope Leo is visiting. Joining us from Beirut is Father Daniel Corrou. Father Corrou is a Jesuit priest from the USA East Province who is currently the Regional Director for Jesuit Refugee Service, Middle East and North Africa. Welcome to Jesuitical, Dan.
Delighted to be here. I'm a big fan, so thank you, Ashley and Zach, for even inviting me. Thank you.
Oh, my goodness. Thanks for joining us and getting us up to speed on the work you're doing in Lebanon, and especially in this moment where Pope Leo is about to embark on his first apostolic journey as Roman pontiff. I'm curious, what's the mood like on the ground? Are people getting ready for the Pope to come visit?
No question. I think we're guessing. It's not official, but there's a big sort of a setup being put up in downtown in the center square, and we know that there's one of the big events will be happening there, and it's one of the big interreligious dialogue conversations, and so there's real activity there. What I'm aware of is that it very similar, actually. This was I was in Iraq during Pope Francis's visit there, and the sense was, oh, someone wants to visit us, like it's worth seeing us, and I think Lebanon, after the war finished about a year ago, and after the economic crisis and sort of the severe blows to the sort of the national self-identity, that sense that someone important wants to be here, I think, is an important thing. And so I see it even in my own team, which is Sunni, Shia, Christian, Druze, Orthodox, Catholic. So I mean, it runs the gamut here. And certainly in our parish. So I also, my side job is as a pastor for an English language parish here. With a lot of migrant workers, and they're super excited. And we have actually, thankfully, the organizing committee has put in several places the voice of migrant workers here and refugees here in Lebanon in the forefront of some of those conversations. So we're going to have some of our people meeting him at the airport and involved in some of the events that they have for pastoral workers and things. So we're very excited about that.
Mm. And I think Pope Francis expressed his desire to visit Lebanon a couple of times, but was prevented because of the security situation. And now it sounds like things are calm enough that Pope Leo is able to go. But of course, there are many, many different countries he could go to. Do you know why he chose Lebanon at this point?
Exactly, and I think that's one of the things that really is striking about it all. Francis made it very clear that he had wanted to visit here. I will admit, selfishly, we were a little bummed when he didn't, because he usually visited the Jesuit community. And so we were really kind of hoping to, get the picture at lunch, but and Pope Leo, good Augustinian, won't be doing that, and it's fine. And it really, we can let our ego go on that one.
Well, you don't know. We haven't had an apostolic trip yet. It would be odd if the Augustinian Pope continued to visit the Jesuit communities, but stranger things have happened. So.
Exactly, true signs of ecumenism in that one. But I think that as we look at the reasons for it, one. When Francis, not only was he getting in poor health, but at that point there was also there was no president. The Christian community, and so the president here in Lebanon has to be a Maronite Christian, could not come to a consensus around who the candidate would be that would be the president there. And of course, head of a state has to be greeted by the head of a state. And now we do have, and so there is. We have a very good, strong president now. We have a good, strong prime minister, and a good, strong speaker of the parliament. So the three major Maronite Catholic as president, Sunni Muslim as the prime minister, and then the speaker of the parliament as a Shia Muslim. So
let's pause there for a second, because I actually think this is one of the most fascinating parts about Lebanon, is that this is actually sort of by design and by convention that each of the sort of primary religious denominations have major representation in the government. Could you just give us like a 101 on that?
Sure. Yeah, that came out of the attempt from the end of the Ottoman Empire through the French Mandate to try to, and then it was reinforced after 1990 with the end of the Civil War here and the Taif agreements, to come to some balance, to be able to say that we have, especially these three, but then also the Druze community is an important sort of fourth player in that. But these three, the Christian community represented by the Maronite Catholics in this case, the Sunni and the Shia, really is the most significant religious groups in the country. That the way that things were working, that there needed to be a clear role for each of those communities. It had been from before the Civil War, it had been that the presidency must always be a Maronite Christian, and that continued. And then these other positions all sort of fit into place. Now, what it says to me, this I go back to John Paul II, when he would come to Lebanon, he came here a couple times, and he would say that Lebanon is the message. And I think that's the way that the church looks at and this is one of the reasons that I think Leo is visiting, is that the story of Lebanon, when it is working, it is a place where a multi-religious, multi-ethnic society of people of lots of different backgrounds, they can all live together. And we can accept that, okay, I am different than my neighbor. Thanks be to God. And I can grow in greater understanding of myself and my community, in that I have this difference and that I have something to learn from them. The Quran will say very explicitly that the reason that we have multiple religions is to push us beyond what we feel safe and comfortable and lazy about. Like that I can just be in my own, like that the differences in religion are something that should allow us to grow in deeper relationship with God, a deeper understanding of God, invite us into the wonder and awe of the things that are around us. When Lebanon is working, that's exactly what it is. It's this very dynamic, intellectually deep environment where people are invited to something greater and sort of invited into the relationship with their neighbor. And when it's not working, it's the absolute story of original sin, of my own ego, and I have to sort of grab what I can and cover what I own, and run away from even the will of God, the desire of God to welcome us into the garden. And then, that ends up descending into war and militias and constant fighting and violence. not constant, but the threat of violence and conflict.
Can you explain that Civil War a bit? Because I think for people my age, I was born in 1990, the year kind of this decades-long Civil War ended. So I grew up thinking of Lebanon as one of the more peaceful countries in the Middle East. I think of Syria, I think of Iraq, I think of Iran as kind of the unstable ones. But of course, that was not the case earlier in the 20th century. So when Lebanon is not working, what was the breakdown?
Here I am dating myself, which is a lonely Friday night. But I was 3 years old when the Civil War in Lebanon started. And I remember very distinctly the news from when I was growing up was very much of the chaos of Lebanon, descending into sectarian violence and all this. 1975, it is an incredibly difficult war to explain in a short snippet. It was, I think the easiest way to say is 3 different wars over 15 years. And the first one really started out as from 1967, when the additional number of Palestinians, so Palestinians have been here displaced since 1948, and then again since 1967. That movement, especially in 1967, caused a destabilization by some accounts in Lebanon, ethnic and religious. And
also economic, I imagine.
Very much, exactly.
The
yeah.
sheer
So
numbers.
hundreds of thousands of people.
Basically, whenever there's an Israeli war against Arab countries, Palestinian refugees end up in Lebanon.
Well, they'd gone to Jordan, and Jordan still welcomes many hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Their leadership had been pushed out of Jordan, or purged out of Jordan, and in the late 60s, early 70s. And the leadership came here for a while, and so there was a lot of unsettlement and unsettled sort of relations there. And there was a lot of skirmishing along the border between Israel and Lebanon. Now, I think it's important to say at that point, the Palestinian movement was not a religious movement. It was sort of a non-aligned socialist, sort of East-focused attention. And a lot of the Lebanese Christians in particular were very much capitalist, Western-focused. And so it was in the time of the Cold War. So the feel of that beginning, those first few years, was much more socialist, capitalist than it was really. It was not an overtly religious war. There were religious connotations to it. And so that happened in 1975 to really 1982 or so. In 1982, you had the Israelis invade southern Lebanon, and that changed the dynamics of the war significantly. Now you have a major external component coming in. And so then you had the Israelis were occupying really all the way up to Beirut here. And then you had tensions not just within different communities in Lebanon, Palestinian or Lebanese, Sunni, Shia. It started to become an anti-Israeli thing. It started to become around the board. But then it also took on much more geopolitical connotations. And so it sort of morphed into a different kind of war from 82 through the mid to late 80s. And then at the end, which was actually one of the most disgusting parts of the Civil War, everyone knew that the war was going to end, and they were trying to figure out in the Shia community, in the Sunni community, in the Christian community, who was going to be the chief of their particular group. And so it really became, I hear stories, even from some of the families of our Jesuits, like stories of it was Christian on Christian violence at the very end, and it was one militia versus another militia. And so there's, I think what I would take from that is that the descent into violence is very, very easy. The creation of a society that is pluralistic is very difficult. It takes a lot of time. That's the first thing. So sin is easy. Real community is a difficult, taxing work. And that's, I think, an important general thing. The second thing is the dominant narrative that I certainly grew up with in the U.S. was that the Middle East was always, because of religion, was always this violent place. No, it hasn't always been violent. I think that's important. It hasn't always been violent any more than any place else. So that was the Civil War. In 1990, they re-established a baseline for what the government was going to look like, and that has been the foundation that we're on since then. I will say, Lebanon, there have been moments of instability since 1990. In 2004, a very popular prime minister was assassinated a major car bomb just down here in downtown. And that it did two things. One, it destabilized the Sunni-Shia relationship, but it also coalesced the whole of Lebanon against, at that point, the Syrian government, Syrian army who was occupying Lebanon. It coalesced the whole Lebanon population against the Syrian army. And so it pushed the Syrian occupation out. This was about 2004. From there, a variety of things happened. 2006, there was another war. Hezbollah captured an Israeli soldier. Israel responded by blowing up pretty much every electrical facility, every water treatment facility, every major bridge, major highways, to the point where, Israel has very few friends in Lebanon after that war. It was a devastating war. That lasted and sort of came to a sort of a stalemate after about 2 or 3 months. What I'll say is that my sense is that at this particular moment, we're seeing the greatest sense of we have a clear, strong government. There is a general sense after the war, which ended a year ago in November with a ceasefire, November of 2024, there's a general sense, again, a hope among a very resilient Lebanese population that this is this could be the space where we could again sort of have enough stability to feel comfortable with one another and to build that community ever more. And that's the hope.
I think you bringing up John Paul II's point that, Lebanon is the message, that you have this religious diversity that certainly can sort of devolve into sectarianism and violence and strife, but, it has also really strong shining moments of cooperation and co-responsibility and living together. I want to focus on one of those religions that maybe is of importance to Pope Leo and people listening to this show, particularly in that the Christian community in Lebanon, because this is it fair to say this is sort of the last Christian stronghold in the Middle East?
I would be careful using the word last. It is the place where there is the largest single percentage of Christians in the Middle East. If you look in Egypt, the numbers of Egyptian Christians are much higher than the number of Lebanese Christians, but it's because there are more people in Egypt. So as we're looking here in the Levant and into Iraq, where you had, significant, in Syria and Iraq in particular, really significant Christian communities that had been, probably as high as 15% in the last century or so. Those have been devastated, first by the U.S. invasion in 2003 of Iraq. That was one of the major forces to push a lot of Iraqi Christians out. And then there was certainly the war in Syria, which for the last 15 years, it was a place where there was a great deal of instability, and a lot of the Christians fled and went through. So no one has any real clear numbers on the number of Christians in either of those countries, but it's a fraction of what it was before, and just a very small number. Whereas here in Lebanon, the general assumption is that probably 20 to 25%, and that's me as a stupid foreigner, relying on the numbers that I read and sort of get a sense of, but that would be the approximate population that we're looking at of Christians, which would mean it would be a significant part of the society here, and I think that's what's most important. To say that it's the last, I think we have to be careful about that. It's been here for a long time. They were Christian long before my Irish and German ancestors ever, before they had any kind of inkling of Christianity. They've gone through a lot of things before. The Christian community here has gone through a lot of things before. I do think if there's going to be a significant, a sizable Christian community that continues in this part of the Middle East, not in Egypt, that this would be a place for that.
And these are Maronite Christians, right?
Exactly. Yeah. These, so Maronite, from St. Maron, again, early on in the church, was a holy monk, lived somewhere between Lebanon and Syria, and formed a Christian church around him, and a very distinct liturgy that went with that. I always love telling my American friends that in the Jesuit community here, especially in the scholastic community. So these are young Jesuits who are studying to be Jesuit, who are studying to be priests. And these are Jesuits that are coming from Lebanon, Syria, or Egypt, mostly. None of them are Roman Catholic. They are all Catholic, but they are Maronite or Melkite. They are Chaldean or Coptic Catholic, Armenian Catholic. So in the realm of the Eastern churches, and that's one of the things that I had no idea. Again, crazy little American coming over here, thinking I knew everything, and like what it was to be church. It's a very, very diverse church. And I think even within the Catholic world, it is a very diverse church. The largest single number of Eastern Catholics here in Lebanon is the Maronite Church. And so that the Maronite Patriarch is here at the installation or the enthronement of the Pope, the Roman Pontiff. The patriarchs of the Eastern churches are all gathered there up on the dais with him as heads of churches that respect him as the head of the church. And so it's this interesting sort of dynamic between like the Roman church can't, discount them. These are older churches. These are churches that have been around for a long time and respect the authority of the Holy Father in Rome.
What do you think accounts for the resilience of the Christian Maronite Christian community in Lebanon? I mean, it has decreased since the early 20th century, and there's a huge Lebanese diaspora community, of course. But, you mentioned Syria and Iraq that had Christian populations. Is it just an accident of history that the Western powers drew the borders of Lebanon in a way that there was parity between Christians and Muslims, and they had to create a power-sharing agreement that made it possible for Christians to continue on in this way?
Yeah, I think there's probably something there. I will say, to your point there, I mean, it was a very deliberate decision in Versailles to draw the line where they drew the line. And I look at it, and again, this is going back to is it the John Paul II version or is it the sinful version? And the John Paul II version is what they did at Versailles is they drew a line, a border around. It was a group of minorities. So you had the Druze, you had the Shia, you had the Ishmaelites, you had a whole range of different kinds of Christians. All of them were minorities, and they drew a line around it, so you had a country of no single majority. There was no single, this is the dominant. There were bigger groups than others, but it was the land of misfit toys. I mean, it was just this weird array of a very, very diverse Levant, Middle East, Eastern Mediterranean. So those were all dynamics that were going on in 1918, 1919. But I think that's probably one of the reasons that there's been it's easier for there to be a significant Christian community here.
And one of the things that has shaped sort of the demographic makeup of Lebanon is the influx of refugees in recent decades. Could you just say a little bit about who has come to Lebanon and from where and how long they've been there and what's that sort of done to the country? And this affects your work in particular with Jesuit Refugee Service.
My daily work. So certainly from 1948 and then again really 1967, significant numbers in the range of well over 100,000, more than that, Palestinian refugees continue to live here. For a long list of regional and local political reasons, they have remained Palestinian. So they do not have Lebanese citizenship. They have their own school systems. They have a UN agency that's dedicated just to the oversight of the refugee camps, the Palestinian camps. And so that it feels very separate, although there are Palestinians around and you know them, there are things that are very distinct, identity cards and things like that for the Palestinians. And then most recently, I was here back in 2011 when the Syrian war was starting, and there was a particular window of time. The first few months of the war in Syria, no one left. They sort of moved inside of Syria. But then in 2012, 2013, there was a particular, whatever it was, social psychology sort of change. And all of a sudden, the people that thought they could just sort of move to a different village while the fighting was going on in their town decided they couldn't stay in Syria any longer. And so in a 6-month window, 1.5 million Syrians entered Lebanon. Again, Lebanon is a country that originally was about 4 million people. So you had 1.5 million additional people on top of that. And we saw people everywhere. They were under the bridges and in abandoned buildings and wherever you go. And so with the Jesuit University here, with the students, campus ministry kinds of things, we just went out and just started talking with the folks. What do you need? Where are you from? Having conversations. And so we started collecting blankets and food and things, slowly realizing that what they were really looking for were longer-term things, education programs, psychosocial support. And so that's really how JRS developed in our work here in Lebanon.
Can I pause to ask a question? I mean, that is a staggering number of refugees, and coming from a country where we let in a pitiful few number. I mean, truly low.
I think it's important, as an American, I think it's, even under the present administration, we've slashed the number of asylum seekers, refugees that we will accept, as the bishops rightly pointed out, the USCCB just in the last few days. Even how we talk about or how we care for anyone who is an immigrant of any kind. There are theological implications to that, and we as the church need to take that very seriously.
Is the number of refugees coming into Lebanon because Lebanon is so generous that or are they incapable to sort of stop the flow?
At the very beginning, Lebanon did, this was back in 2012 and 13, we all thought that the war in Syria was going to last 6 weeks, a couple months. And the original idea was among, if you heard people talking about it, many Lebanese said, well, during our wars, Civil War or the 2006 war, many of us had gone into Syria for a short window of time. And so we're paying back. We're just welcoming them in with the understanding that it's going to be a short window. I think that's one way to look at it. And so there is a generosity there. That ebbs and flows, and that some of the political leaders here will use it as a cudgel, in the same way that immigration, refugees can be used as a cudgel in lots of places, U.S. included. The other part of it, though, is, and I think this is the important thing to mention, the overwhelming majority of the impact in terms of human numbers, but cost of the refugee crisis, displacement crisis globally. It's true in the Middle East, it's true around Myanmar, it's true around Venezuela, it's true all around Central Africa, Congo. The overwhelming majority of the brunt of that, those crises, are borne by the neighboring countries, which are generally themselves very poor. So Chad is welcoming hundreds of thousands, millions of refugees from Sudan, but Chad itself was already poor before the Sudan war started a couple of years ago. Even under the most open of American presidencies, we were only receiving a few hundred, maybe up to 100,000. I forget the actual numbers.
Yeah, I think under Biden it was like 125,000 was the upper limit. So in Lebanon it's a quarter of the population.
Precisely.
So in the U.S. that would have been 80 million people would be the equivalent.
Precisely. Yep, 75, 80 million people would have been the numbers. So imagine, and not just that they were welcomed in and fully integrated into society, as we would do in a refugee resettlement program into the U.S. Imagine they just showed up. They had nothing, and they just arrived en masse in a 6-month window, 75, 80 million people, just like that. And so I think that does two things. One, what are the limits of our own generosity? But then also just what is the real impact on those generally, sorry, we just lost electricity here. So it should come back on in a second here. There we go. Yeah, so there's the sense of the limits of our own generosity, but it's also the real impact and the real support needed of those neighboring countries, which again already were generally pretty themselves were already vulnerable. And so I think that's an important thing, and that's the lesson I think for me of Lebanon is that there is a level of generosity. For almost 15 years now, the Lebanese people have all in all welcomed this 1.5 million Syrian refugees. It has required, without question, the help of the international community. So UN agencies, NGOs, JRS included among them, have been here to help respond to that.
And of course, we're living in a time when the international community and the United States in particular is pulling back on that foreign aid. So I'm curious how that's affecting maybe your work in particular, JRS in Lebanon.
Yeah. In Lebanon, thanks be to God, we did not have U.S. funding directly. The impact has been indirect. What we see is that in Lebanon is that the services that were provided by other NGOs that were receiving U.S. money, we get government funding, but at the moment in Lebanon, it's only from Spain, Italy, Germany. But other organizations were getting money from PRM, State Department, or USAID, and those programs just shut down. And so when we have a woman who's been raped, before we were able to refer that person to a shelter run by one of these other organizations. Now, as she's trying to flee the violent situation she finds herself in, we don't have places that we can refer her to. The number of shelters has shriveled, especially for Syrians, even for migrant workers as well. But so the impact is clear and immediate there. There were places where we were able to navigate with other NGOs, and that has disappeared. So that has clear and immediate impact. What I will also highlight, this is not to your question about Lebanon, but JRS had a very large program in Iraq, and we were doing amazing work with Yazidi genocide survivors and also Christians who had been persecuted by ISIS. And we had some really extraordinary programs, especially in mental health work, to care for women in particular who had very often been held as sex slaves for up to a year or more. And that funding, we had an exit strategy plan for that funding for the next 2 years. It ended after just 6 months, and the U.S. funding just stopped. There was no warning. It just stopped immediately. Thankfully, and this is where, as a faith-based organization and with lots of supporters of JRS globally through the Jesuit network of friends and family, we were able to get some funding for that program so that we didn't just have to stop the mental health programs on January 24th. We were able to do a slow phase down until the end of July or August, and to at least do whatever we could to sort of reduce the harm that would be done by the immediate closure. So the people are incredibly vulnerable there still. The impact of that was devastating for the local communities. Thankfully, as JRS, we were able to sort of mitigate that a little bit just by a 6-month exit.
Well, looking back on our conversation, I think it's pretty clear why the Pope is interested in a country like Lebanon. You have this ancient Christian population. You have this society that is really a laboratory, not for interreligious dialogue per se, but really interreligious living and constructing of a society. And also, it is sort of an epicenter of which there are many, of the refugee crisis that we find ourselves in. So to me, even those three things alone makes total sense why the Pope should be interested and why Catholics around the world should be concerned and interested on the fate of Lebanon. Before we let you go, though, you mentioned something at the beginning of our conversation that I just wanted to briefly touch on if we could, which is you mentioned helping out at a English-speaking migrant parish, which I find fascinating because I hear this pop up in conversations with Catholics in the Middle East where this is becoming an increasing part of the church's mission globally. Could you just say maybe a little bit about who goes to church there and what your role or what the church's role is in serving those people?
Of course. Yeah. I have to say it's the thing that I love the most in the course of the week. My work here, I love all the team, the 500-600 people that we have working for us at JRS in Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, Iraq. But my work is actually pretty administrative. It's fundraising and sort of following up and sort of running a structure, all that kind of thing. Monday to Saturday, I work for JRS. And then on Sundays, I'm the pastor in the Jesuit church here in downtown Lebanon, in downtown Beirut. For about 40 or 50 years, some other Jesuits have been running an English language mass. And for a long list of reasons, the majority of the people that were coming to that were migrant workers. And so these were people from the Philippines, from Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Sudan, South Sudan, Sierra Leone, sort of runs the gamut. It's an amazing thing. It's a parish, and so we have Mass on Sunday mornings, and it's this beautiful, vibrant thing. It's packed. We'll have 150, 200 people in the church, and we come from all over. For many years now, We've had a lunch for all after the Mass. And so it depends. Depending on the week, it's either the Sri Lankan community that cooks the meal for 150 people, or the Sudanese community, or the Filipino community. And as a parish, the baseline work is the sacramental, liturgical, spiritual care of the people who come there. So we were doing Mass. We would do hospital visits. We would bury the dead. We would baptize the children. We would confirm and marry. We would do all the normal stuff of a parish. It happened at the beginning of the war, September 2024. That night, there were huge explosions and a lot of violence in the far south, along the border with Israel and Lebanon, and then also in southern Beirut, where Hezbollah has a stronghold. And people fled those places. And so we saw Lebanese who were on every street corner, just sleeping out in the open air. All of the schools, public schools, were closed and transformed into shelters. Now, the shelters were national public shelters and were supposed to be open to everyone. However, we knew that they were refusing to accept Syrians and they were refusing migrant workers, mostly because they were black and brown. They came from Africa, they came from Asia, and they were just openly refused. What we were realizing is that on the first few nights of the war, we were receiving 50, 60 migrants who would just show up here. Some of them had walked from southern Lebanon. One example in particular that stands out, there was a young woman from Sierra Leone. Her employers had packed the car when they knew the fighting was happening, packed the car, put the dog in the car, and then said to her, "You take care of the house, you just stay here, watch the house, we'll come back later." They drove up north to a safe place, and she had to stay there. So after a day of the bombardment around her house, she saw one or two other young women who were in very similar situations. They walked from southern Lebanon up the coast and ended up here. And I think it's important to say, as a church, we on those first few nights of the war, the migrant workers who couldn't get into the government shelters, they didn't go to the other NGOs that work with migrant workers, all of whom do really, really good work. But no one went there. They showed up here. Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslim, whoever they were, if they'd never been to Beirut before, they'd never seen this church before, when they asked people around, where do you go when things go bad as a migrant worker? Everyone said, come to the church here. And so it was overwhelming, and it was an incredibly difficult few weeks. But at the end, we were getting 150 people showing up every day looking for shelter. In the church here, in the building where I am right now, we housed about 100 people here, which was the maximum. And then in the Jesuit retreat house up in the north, and then several other monasteries up in the mountains, we were able to move hundreds of people up into those monasteries during the war. But I think it's incredibly important to name the role as the church. Unlike as JRS, we navigate between we are an NGO and we are the church. As the church, there was a long-term commitment here to migrant populations, and it had shown itself not so much in doing things for migrants, but being a safe place for them to build their own community. As the Jesuits even, we've been here for 350 years, and we're going to be here for the next 350 years. We've been here through all of those things before, and people know that this is a place where you can go and be welcome. And I think that's an important part of it. The services of an NGO are absolutely essential in emergency times. But how are we able to live that in such a way that those emergency situations are based on a sense that this is a safe place. You have a place where you belong, where you're at home, and you're welcome. I'm also responsible for the only full-time Buddhist temple in all of Lebanon. So that is one of my responsibilities as a Catholic priest. And I'm also, the other thing that I'm very proud of is that I'm responsible. There's a cricket league that plays every Sunday. We'll have anywhere between 300 and 1,000 men and women, mostly from South Asia, so Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka. But more and more, several of the Filipinas who come to Mass here, they were talking with some of their Sri Lankan friends, and they were saying, "Oh, we were looking for something, like we don't get exercise. We need something to do." And they're like, "Oh, come play cricket with us." And so we have two teams actually of Filipino women who play cricket. In Philippines doesn't have cricket like America. There's no cricket in the Philippines. We have two Filipina teams here, and they do really well. One of them won a tournament a couple of weeks ago. So it's this weird sort of dynamic of having this multicultural, multi-religious cricket tournament that is a place where they feel safe. Now, we can provide health care on Sundays, and they all need health care. We can provide legal care, and they all need that. But the reason they come here is that they have a safe place where they're their own communities, and they can build their own communities and do the things that they love and eat the food that they love. They can be, themselves here. And I think that's an important role for the church to play.
I think you should quickly build a tennis team, and then maybe you convince Pope Leo to visit
Leo.
you.
Oh my God, Bob from Chicago, we got a tennis team here for you.
A refugee tennis team? How could he resist? All right, Dan, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom about this really fascinating part of the world with us. Before we let you go, we do have one final question that we ask all of our guests, and that is if you could canonize one person, living or dead, Catholic or not, fictional or real, who would it be and why?
I'll choose someone from our region here, and someone who's actually on his way to canonization. It's a Jesuit. His name was Nicholas Cloiters, Kluiters. They've started his cause for canonization. Some of the paperwork just went in the other day. Really an extraordinary example for me. When you read his diaries, he was a man filled with questions, uncertainty. He felt embarrassed about his Arabic language skills, which I resonate with. He always wished that we were smarter or better or stronger or whatever it was. And so you read his diaries there, but then you look at the work that he was doing in a particular town in Barca. He was killed in 1985. He'd been in this tiny little village. He had chosen that. The Jesuits here at that time were sort of the stereotype of what we think of as Jesuits. They were upper class, working with the university folks, working with the big high school, the best high school in the country. He wanted something different. He wanted to be with the people. And so he went to this tiny little agrarian village in the Bekaa. And the idea at that time that the villages in the Bekaa during the Civil War were being divided. And so Christians, one group would have to leave, and so the village would be pure. Either be all Shia or all Christian or all whatever. And he was living in the village and trying to say, it's important for us to live together, to do this message of John Paul, like to be the message where, okay, we are different. Yes, no question whatsoever. And that's a good thing. That's something that can build our community better. And so he was doing some amazing work to keep those two populations there. He built aqueducts in order to improve the farming. He built roads in order to help farmers get to market and get better prices for their agriculture. He built a medical clinic. He built schools. So did some extraordinary work there. For me, the best story of his life came after his death. He was killed in 1985 by, we don't know exactly who, tortured to death. I mean, just terrible, kidnapped and tortured for the message that we could live together. He was killed because of that. The story that I always love from one of the sisters, so this medical clinic that he opened in the town of Barca, a group of sisters was given the responsibility for that when it opened. And I was talking with one of them many years ago now, and she was telling the story that after the war, everyone knew who had killed Nicholas. It's a small village, gossip and all that kind of thing. Everyone sort of knew it was this 2 or 3 guys over here. And they were farmers over on that part of the town. Well, one of those guys had a farming accident, tractor or something like that, and a big slash in his leg. And he's transported to the clinic that Nicholas had opened. And all of the villagers who were waiting there for their appointment in the medical clinic, they were all whispering and gossiping. They were telling the sisters, you need to kick him out. He was the one who killed Abuna Nicholas. He was the one who killed Father Nicholas. He can't, he's not welcome here. And the sister said to all of them, no. This is exactly who Nicholas would welcome. This is exactly the gospel. If we can't welcome our enemies, then what kind of Christian can we be? What kind of a church can we be? And so Nicholas Cloiters, an amazing guy, not a real strong, like a big, sort of loud kind of voice, but an extraordinary guy who, with his own wounds, was able to be an incredible witness in the middle of a very difficult time.
All right. Father Nicholas Cloiters, pray for us.
Amen.
Father Dan, thank you so much for the work you're doing, for making us all a little bit smarter. Where can people support the work that you're doing and that JRS is doing?
Thank you, yeah. JRS USA, if you type in JRS USA, they are our funder agency and do some great advocacy and great accompaniment with us in the U.S. And so they are the ones that help us with all of our fundraising in the U.S. And so JRS USA,
so
check them
JRS
out.
USA. Please, listeners, support the work they're doing. It's some of the best work that the church does. And, it's going to a good cause. Just look at this guy.
I love being with both of you. A big fan. So thank you for the work that you guys are doing. Incredibly important. Thank you.
Hey, likewise. It's been a pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Ditto. God bless. Thank you. Bye.
And now we have As One Friend Speaks to Another, the part of our show where we talk about where we're finding God in our lives this week and share stories of faith from across the Catholic Church. And Zach, this week I want to talk about a moment at the U.S. Bishops' meeting, and it was the opening prayer that we sat through on Thursday. Well, not just that, but that was what inspired this. You remember they kind of all stood up and they were reading from their little packets.
Yes.
I remember thinking, this feels so not prayerful.
Well, what specifically did? Because I could go a number of ways with this, I feel like.
It was just like, I don't know. It was like, kind of like, we've all been in situations like that where it's like, all right, we have to get through this before we get to the real meat of the meeting.
Or maybe the meal. Maybe
yeah.
It's, that Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, whoever prays the fastest eats the most.
Yeah. And I think part of it was like that it was this whole meeting, it feels like a board meeting. And then I was like, well, it is a board meeting. And maybe there's nothing wrong with it being a board meeting. We think of, doing the work of the church or the work of God or being holy as like having to happen like either like in a monastery or in the streets serving the poor. But like so much of what it takes to do, that like that on the ground stuff that, we can feel really good about takes this behind the scenes work that is kind of boring. I know this very well from my own mom, who's an accountant that has used her gifts as an accountant to serve many, many nonprofits who do really good work. So even just like this important statement on migration, like if you're going to get 2/3 of 300 people to agree, it's going to take getting 300 people in a room.
And setting up their electronic voting and training them on it.
Yeah, and that's the work of God. And in the moment, it might not look like pious or look very prayerful, but it's important, and God is also working there.
Yeah, I think sometimes there is this divide we have between, even in our own spiritual lives, between what is like administrative work and what is like prayer or what is ministry. I think it is an invitation. I think those things are sometimes distinct, like, right? It's not the same, but it is all encompassing of the life of what a Christian is supposed to be about, I think. Like, you can't have one without the other. Although Jesus did just kind of ramble around, it seems, and have no place to call his home. And so I'm not sure if he necessarily did a lot of administrating, but he certainly empowered his church to do some administrating.
But I think of like all of we know so many Jesuits and other priests who like, they get called up into administrative work and they're not always that excited about it, but it's, it's a sacrifice because someone has to do it. And so taking on that sacrifice, I think, St. Ignatius, he wanted to be out being a missionary, but he spent most of his time writing letters.
I want to be podcasting all the time. But that's not the only part of my work in America that I do, and likewise for you. I mean, I think that's the trade-off, right?
Yeah. So I just want to thank the bishops and all the people who do administrative work out there, who do the unsexy work of making things work behind the scenes.
Yeah, maybe the invitation to like people listening is to pray about their administrative work and how it supports maybe some of the more obviously life-giving work that they do.
All right, I'll get us out of here. Jesuitical is made by us, Sebastian Gomes, Will Gualtieri, and Kevin Christopher Robles. Faith formation provided by Father Eric Sundrup, S.J. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, or like the show on your favorite platforms. You can support Jesuitical by subscribing to America Magazine at americamagazine.org. I'm Ashley McKinless with Zach Davis. We'll be off next week, but we'll see you in Advent.